Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your final week of literacy of this half term. What a pleasure it has been teaching you throughout this term, and I'm looking forward to another great week as we finish our Alma narrative. Now, on Friday, you produced lots of brilliant paragraphs, and today we're continuing on with the story as Alma eventually enters the shop and tries to get her hand on the doll, the exact miniature of her. Please pause the video now and write today's date, Monday the 8th of February, and our learning objective. That is, we are learning to use a variety of sentence openers to aid cohesion. To aid means to help, and as we've discussed before, cohesion is there to help our writing flow. So cohesion means our writing flows along and our sentences link with one another. They are not stilted, so it's really, really important that we are able to be cohesive. Okay, so you now should have written the date and what, and we're now ready to have a look at how we might include a range of sentence starters in our work. So you'll see here that I have written down the acronym DAD waivers. My turn. DAD waivers. Now, probably not one that you're familiar with, but this can help you remember various ways to start your sentences. So the D stands for description. For example, you might give a description of a setting or a character to start off the sentence. The A is for action, so perhaps something they're doing. D, dialogue, so you may start off with a conversation or something that a character has said. W for where, so that could be a place in the distance, for example. A, adverb. V, verb. E, estimation of time. Estimation of time is any time adverbial, including then, within a few seconds, or immediately. Lots of options for that one. Rhetorical questions are R, and S stands for similes or metaphors. And you know that you can also start with any other forms of figurative language too. If you remember to use this acronym, then your writing will be more cohesive than if you were to just start sentences with Alma, 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 or she. Of course, there will be times when you will use the character's name to start the sentence, or you will use a pronoun. However, being cohesive means making choices that allow for this variation. So some different uses, some names, and sometimes some other sentence starters. And that's your job as a writer to control that. So let's look at what we will be including in this paragraph. Well, we will be talking about, first of all, when she enters the shop. And the reason why I stayed on this page today is because I thought it was really important to read back the end of my paragraph that I'd written on Friday so that my writing could flow on. And really the main purpose today is to discuss what Alma's experiences were inside the shop. So without further ado, let's read back my final few sentences from Friday and then get started. She tried the handle again. Still no movement. Frustrated, she threw a snowball at the teasing window. So I know she doesn't just walk into the shop. I still want to remember what I'd been taught on Friday, or remember what we discussed on Friday about tension and suspense. And I know that she only walked into the shop because she heard a little noise. I think it was the door creaking. So I'm going to start by saying, then, and it's important, I use an adverbial so that my writing flows on. You could use another estimation of time there perhaps, if you wanted to. A few moments later, she heard a creak. I'm just going to use then. Then she heard a creak. Heard in the past tense is spelt with an A. It is a homophone. The other herd, H-E-R-D, refers to a herd of animals. Now, I'm also going to use some repetition here to make the reader, or to emphasise this point rather, and to make the reader think that this is suspicious, that the door is creaking open. So I'm going to say a creak that alerted her continuing to write in the past tense, alerted her to the fact that the door was now open. I'm going to use the words that alerted her to the fact that the door was invitingly ajar. Ajar means open a little bit, and I've used the word invitingly because I want to make it seem like the shop is tempting her or urging her to come in. That the door was invitingly ajar. Invitingly ajar. And as I said, ajar means just slightly open. So, when she noticed that the door was ajar, I remember from the video that she felt quite happy. So, I'm going to say that she approached, or she walked towards it might be better, because I do recall that I used approached in my last paragraph, or she crept towards it perhaps. And I'm going to add a comma here and add on a little bit of additional detail. A smile of glee spreading across her face. A smile of glee spreading across her face. Let's read that back and see if we have effectively, or if I have effectively described her entrance to the shop. Then she heard a creak that alerted her to the fact that the door was invitingly ajar. She approached, a smile of glee spreading across her face. So you can see here that I've started with an estimation of time. Here I've used description, a creak that alerted her, or perhaps you could say action either. A creak is when something happens, and I've also used the technique of repetition to really emphasize that point. And here I've just used a pronoun she, which is fine because I haven't used she in either of my previous two sentences. Now, she's in the shop and she's happy to be there. What happens next? Have a think. Yes, well done if you noticed that she spotted lots of dolls, and some of you even may remember that she spotted the little boy pedalling the bicycle, or first of all, he was lying on the floor, wasn't he? Now, if you don't remember that detail about the little boy pedalling the bicycle, or the fact that Alma was mesmerised by all of the dolls when she first walked into the shop, then I would recommend that you go back and re-watch the video. The more you familiarise yourself with the video, the more ideas you will have. Now, we know that the main purpose of this paragraph then is to describe her experience inside the shop. So, I've said she's approached the shop, and I can infer from that last sentence that she's inside. I'm going to start my next paragraph then, or the next part of this paragraph, with some description. Before I say that she saw lots of dolls, I want to set the scene and describe the shop so the reader can get an idea of where Alma was. I'm going to say the shop was dark and musty, or the shop was dark and smelt musty. It lacked any signs of life, really. Musty means it smells quite damp. And now I'm going to add in some more description, and instead of just saying there were dolls everywhere, I'm going to say on every wall and on every surface, on every wall and on every surface. That description will allow the reader to imagine a shop flooded with dolls. If I don't say that, then the reader might just think there's a few dolls. But actually, one of the unique things about this story is that there are lots of dolls, lots of children who have become victims of this shop, really. On every wall and on every surface were hundreds of dolls. Of all shapes and sizes. And you might even want to say some of which looked familiar. of all shapes and sizes. And I'm going to add a sentence in here to get the reader thinking, what's going on? I'm going to say, every single one was unique. Why do you think every single one was unique? Why do you think a sentence like that might cause the reader to think something's not right, or that's a little bit strange? Well done if you notice that when you normally go into a shop or a toy shop, there often is more than one product that's the same. So for example, there's more than one of the same kind of doll. It's not possible for a shop to stock. Well, it might be in some shops, but mostly it's not possible to stock every single type of product and only one of that product. Most shops will have numerous products that are the same. So it's very unusual for every single one to be different. And of course that relates to the fact that every single child in this world is different. No two children, apart from maybe twins or triplets, look the same. So that's why it's incredibly rare and will hopefully get the reader thinking. So you might add on, every single one was unique. You could even use repetition there. Every single one looked like it had a life of their own. You're giving away a little bit of hint or a little hint to the reader, but you're not giving away too much. We're not saying every single doll used to be a child or every single doll looked like a child that had gone missing. That's too much. We're giving away a little bit of a hint so that the reader can infer for themselves, and that's what makes them keep reading. Okay, so every single one was unique. Now, we know she's seen all of these dolls. Let's have a think. What does she do when she sees the dolls? Well, she was mesmerised by them, and then she really made her way over to the table which her doll sat on. So I'm going to continue on, and instead of just saying Alma made her way to the table, I'm going to use one of my sentence starters, and I'm going to include how she felt. So I'm going to say eagerly, which in this case eagerly is an adverb. It will describe how she made her way over to the table. Eagerly means she was really keen. Eagerly, Alma made her way to the table. Straighten that up for you. Made her way to the table, upon which her doll was sat. To the table upon which her doll sat. But I know that as she made her way to that table, she was distracted by the sound at her feet. But she was distracted by a sound at her feet. So I'm going to say, but was immediately distracted by a sound at her feet. But was immediately distracted by a sound at her feet. And I've used the word sound because I'm holding back a little bit of information. Or you might say, but it was immediately gripped by the sight of somebody on a bicycle. But was immediately distracted by a sound at her feet. Let's continue and read that back then. The shop was dark and smelt musty. On every wall and on every surface were hundreds of dolls of all shapes and sizes. Every single one was unique. Every single one looked like it had a previous life, or they had a life of their own. Eagerly, Alma made her way to the table upon which her doll sat, but was immediately distracted by a sound at her feet. What was the sound at her feet? You're right, it was a little boy cycling a bicycle. Now, I'm not going to start with she saw a boy cycling on his bicycle because I'm trying to aid cohesion. How might I start? Well, I started with an adverb there to describe how she walked up to the table. She's just seen a little boy cycling, so perhaps I could start with the action. Pedaling. What was happening? Pedaling a miniature toy tricycle. A miniature toy tricycle. Again, it's really key to include that it's miniature because then the reader will start to gain a bit of an understanding of what's happening. Pedaling a miniature toy tricycle, she found. So in this case, I've started with what the little boy was doing. So I've started with the action. She found a small pale-faced doll. I'm using my expanded noun phrases to add to the description. A small pale-faced doll in a black suit. In a black suit. Which had fallen on its side. I'm trying to include as much description as I can. Which had fallen on its side. Now, I know that once it had fallen on its side, she picked him back up, and she did that straight away. So I'm going to use an estimation of time here. And I'm going to say, within seconds, I'm going to highlight that for you because that's another way of starting our sentence. Within seconds, she had picked him up. She had picked him up. Or she had propped him back up on three wheels. And then she turned back to face her own doll. And turned back to face her own doll. But of course, we know that when she turned back to face her own doll, there was no doll. So I'm going to use an ellipsis here. But there was no doll. Full stop. Okay, let's read that back and see if we have effectively conveyed what happened inside that shop before we finish it off. So as we know, she threw a snowball at the end of our last paragraph. She threw a snowball because she was frustrated at the fact that she couldn't enter. So today we're picking it up. She tries to get into the shop. Then she heard a creak that alerted her to the fact that the door was invitingly ajar. She approached, a smile of glee spreading across her face. Now the red bit is the bit where she's inside the shop. So I really want you to focus on your various sentence starters here. I've started off with some description. The shop was dark and musty. On every wall and on every surface were hundreds of dolls of all shapes and sizes. And it's important you use that language to create that imagery for the reader so that they can start to imagine what kind of environment we're in now. Every single one was unique. Eagerly, Alma made her way to the table upon which her doll sat, but was immediately distracted by a sound at her feet. I've included an action to start with. Pedaling a miniature toy tricycle, she found a small, pale-faced doll in a black suit which had fallen on its side. And now I've used an estimation of time. Within seconds, she had picked him up and turned back to face her own doll. But there was no doll. I've used an ellipsis there for a slight pause. something the reader did not expect to happen. But there was no doll. Now, to finish it off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rhetorical question in at the end as my final sentence, so that the reader can begin to think, where is the doll? That's what I want the reader to be wondering. I want them to be left intrigued at this point, so that they want to read on. And I'm going to say, where had she gone? Add that in at the end. And then at that point, if I've written this paragraph effectively, I want the reader to be thinking, where on earth has she gone? I need to read on. I'm desperate to find out more. Okay, so that is today's paragraph. It's a really important one because it builds us up to our finale tomorrow.